Hello and welcome everyone to the United Survivors webinar, Investigating Suicide in the Wake of Prescription Opiate Reduction. We have an esteemed panel, national panel here of researchers and people with lived experience that are going to talk about a very important research study that they are conducting, centering this investigation on the stories behind the tragedies. I am Sally Spencer-Thomas. I am the current president of United Survivors, and I welcome all of you into this conversation today. I'll turn it over now to Chase to talk a little bit about the mission and vision of United Survivors.
My name's Chase Plank, and I'm the Workplace Programs Manager for United Survivors. We help people turn pain into purpose and work to elevate voices of lived experience. We put the lived experience of suicide attempt and loss survivors into action through leadership, collaboration, and advocacy. We envision a world where lived experience becomes the fulcrum that leverages all suicide prevention efforts. Our complete vision is to see a day when we are no longer needed. We are very involved with the National Workplace Guidelines for Suicide Prevention and help businesses and organizations change their culture through our HOPE certification program. We offer storytelling courses and retreats to help you determine if you're ready to share your lived experience story and how to share it effectively and safely. We also have a series of books on men's mental health called Guts, Grit, and the Grind. And our webinars are on hot topics in suicide prevention, always incorporating voices of lived experience. I'm going to send it over to Stacy now.
My name is Stacy Williams. I'm a United Survivors board member. Stefan Cortez is a doctor and an investigator at University of Alabama at Birmingham and the Birmingham VA Medical Center. Also, we have two people intimately connected to this challenge. One is Jim Elliott in Lake Oconee, Georgia, who lost his brother. Thank you. Who lost his brother Danny after his doctor's office was closed and his pain care suddenly stopped. The other is Mark Flower, a veteran who works in peer support for veterans in crisis and as an advisor to many VA studies focused on mental health, suicide, and addiction. So welcome to our speakers.
Hi, I'm Stefan Cortez. I'm a professor of medicine at Hearsink School of Medicine, an investigator at the VA in Alabama, although our study is not restricted to veterans. And of course, I'm here with two important people with lived experience who we're going to introduce in just a moment. Statements I make are not formally those of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs or the state of Alabama. The agenda is that we're going to describe first in very technical terms for one slide the aims of the study, like you would in a regular research proposal, and a little bit about the types of people who came together for this study to begin, which it's just ongoing. We're recruiting. Why we think the study is necessary. And then we're going to transition for an interlude to some perspectives on this study from Jim Elliott and Mark Flower, who have some pertinent lived experience here. Then I'm going to introduce what is this psychological autopsy thing, which is central to the study and to getting the stories, and the challenge of recruitment and why we seek your help and ideas too, and resources if you have them, but spreading the word. And then I invite you to offer suggestions or pose questions. Disclaimers. I do own stock in two health stocks. They're not related to this topic or this industry. I once assisted an MD in an administrative dispute, but I am not involved in an opioid litigation on either side. That's a very sensitive part of this story. The work we described that's ongoing is approved by two institutional review boards, one at a university, one at the VA. And there is no disclosure of identifiable data here or permitted at all, even if there was a court order, because of these certificates of confidentiality. Okay, this is the promised aims slide. And the aims of the study, which is called Clinical Context of Suicide Following Opioid Transitions, also put as CSI opioids, yes, that was intentional, is to characterize patient and context factors associated with suicide among 110 to 115 people who died by suicide in the context of a prescription opioid reduction. And then to look at if there's differences between those deaths that occur among veterans and those that occurred among non-veterans. The method is going to be something we introduce, but we are currently funded by the VA with explicit authorization to include non-veterans. And we're going until 2026 or as long as we can, because no one else is doing this. There are a lot of types of people who brought together commitment and emotion and personal expertise to make this kind of study happen. I want to show the types of people. This is a good subset of our team, but by no means all of it. I'm a physician investigator. Allison Varley is an implementation scientist with a PhD who looks at health systems. April Hogue is our study coordinator. Mary Gilmore, a research assistant, both have MPHs. Dr. Adam Gordon actually is more of an addiction researcher, but he's one of my key mentors who encouraged me to pursue this. Thomas Joyner in the second column there is considered by some, one of the nation's or even the world's leading suicide scholars. And he kind of jumped on to advise us when we were trying to figure out how to get started. We have an analyst, we have Megan, who's a medical anthropologist, Kevin and Fuqua, who we're going to talk about in a moment. There are people from VA suicide prevention, another person with lived experience, Cassania Richardson Sloan, a disability health advocate, Don Gibson, Kristen Beasley, it's missing a T, apologies to her, who is part of the Chronic Pain Research Alliance, Mark Flower and Jim Elliott, who you're about to hear from, and Kate Nicholson from the National Pain Advocacy Center, herself a person with lived experience of pain, and a partnership with Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, which is one of the national organizations that helps military and veteran families who have lost someone, as well as the Krulak Marine Alliance of Alabama. The context, in part, is a change in prescriptions. This is not about this. This is just to kind of set the stage that, yes, we've had a big swing in our prescribing. And there's this kind of repeated signal in statistical data. Signals in statistical data are not truth. They are just things you look at and try to figure out, what does this mean? But in the Veterans Administration, we've had a study, I was a co-author, that found that discontinuation of opioids seemed to be statistically associated with suicide or overdose death. It was a good study, but it didn't show why or how the opioids were stopped or whether they were even long-term recipients. And it was kind of old data. Oregon Medicaid has these suicide events that seem to happen more often when people have an abrupt stoppage or even a dose reduction in stoppage. And it didn't look like reducing slowly helped. But again, it was a really small number of people, and they don't know why the opioids were stopped. And in commercial Medicare data, there's something like which is a big database, mental health crises, including suicidal presentations at hospitals, were more common after a dose decline. And it was persistent. It wasn't just acutely in the wake of a change of medication. But why were they reduced? That isn't something they know. I think of suicide as a complex tragedy. And I use this very seemingly really strange from out of left field example to tell why statistics alone don't answer questions. I usually have to explain this to researchers, but you might have a more intuitive feeling for this than research heads do. This is a different domain, a complex tragedy of the airplane crash. And the example concerns a flight in 1996, right when I was beginning my first job out of residency, and TWA Flight 800 exploded and crashed 12 minutes after takeoff from JFK. And a lot of people passed away in that event. And if we were just research heads who got big grants from the NIH, we'd say, I'm going to study this problem. I'm going to get a database of all the airplanes. This is how most opioid research is done, by the way. This is not unique to airplane. This is how research heads do it. They get a database of all the planes that went up and then identify the few that went down. And that database will have some common data elements about every single airplane, how old the plane was, what model it was, maybe how old the pilot was, how old the staff were, whether they were rested or not rested, whether it was rainy, cloudy. And that's all they get because that's all that's standardized. Then they run these big statistical models and they say the risk factors are, I'm just making this up, pilot age, aircraft age, and weather. I don't know. But that could be useful. There's no question that could be useful. It's a little like the studies I just showed you before. But is it really how you would understand why that particular plane went down? Would it really teach you the lesson to prevent a future crash of the exact same type? Because that's not at all what was done in response to the TWA flight. There was case investigation. All the parts were picked up and they were reassembled. And investigators from the government determined that explosion occurred due to ignition of a flammable fuel and air mixture that was in a hot and mostly empty center wing tank coupled to a spark. And they issued rules to stop that from happening again. And there's no way that statistical models that you can publish in JAMA would have gotten that insight or led to that safety rule. And I learned, and this is, we're going to lead up to hearing from some voices from partners now, but I learned that there are individual human beings who were tracking and learning about these deaths as they happened. And one of them was a woman named Anne Fuqua, who's a partner to our study and the inspiration behind it. And she had been recording in her own private files when she heard about deaths, and she would track them as best she could. She had incomplete information, but she had hundreds of them, enough to suggest there's a real problem where the human story could be learned. And that was actually mentioned in the New York Times in January of 2023. Now, at this point, very carefully, I'm going to take myself off screen and introduce first Jim Elliott, who is with us. And Jim actually is an attorney. He's in Georgia. He lost his brother.
Thank you, Dr. Kertes. Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Elliott. I'm a semi-retired attorney. I practice in Georgia. About a year and a half ago, not quite that, I was on a business trip with my wife out of state and got a startling email from my brother who indicated that he and his wife had decided to end their lives. Danny suffered an electrical injury when he was about 31 years old. It caused nerve damage in his brain. He became a chronic pain patient, tried a number of different treatments, visited hospitals and medical providers all around the country. He found a doctor interestingly enough, in Middle Georgia, Dr. Thomas Sachi, who understood his problem and treated him. Danny admittedly took pretty high dosage of pain medication, but it was only to, I always say he did that to survive, not to enjoy. Unfortunately, about 7 years ago, his doctor was arrested for alleged violation of DEA regulations. Dr. Sachi served a couple years in prison, but later had his sentence overturned on appeal, if you will, and was retried on some charges and entered some fairly insignificant non-guilty plea or guilty pleas. I'm sorry. That began Danny's quest to find medical care. It took him from Georgia all the way to Los Angeles. And in November of 2022, his physician, Dr. David Bockoff's license was suspended by the DEA. He sent me a text message and said, I don't know where I can turn now. I don't know what I can do. I offered to cancel my trip and go be with him. No, please go ahead. And so what really happened to my brother was this sudden loss of medication, opioid medications that he had become dependent upon. I wouldn't say addicted to, but they made his life be at least survivable, if you will. And what I've learned after Danny's death was that he was very active in chronic pain medication, chronic pain patient groups. In social media, he made a number of dear friends that really helped him, including Dr. Kertes, who had a connection with someone who attempted to help him find some medical care. The termination of his medication was very abrupt. He made some effort to try to find somebody. It's a very sensitive subject with physicians because of the scrutiny under which they operate in today's world, and just decided, I guess, that he was tired of the battle. So it's been a difficult battle for me, for my 88-year-old mother, and all those who loved him. I'm real honored that I was invited to be a part of the study with Dr. Kertes, and because Danny's story is one that needs to be told, and I am making every effort I can to try to identify people that are sort of in this niche area of loved ones that were on pain medication, were tampered down, or either immediately cut off. Suicide became the end result, and my goal in life, one of my goals in life today, is I want to help others perhaps avoid the consequence my brother and then his wife suffered. So thank you, Dr. Stefan.
Thank you. Mark Flower is someone we met as a veteran, a peer support specialist, an advisor to VA research, an advocate, and the founder of Dry Hooch America. And Mark, would love to hear from you.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Mark Flower. I'm a United States Army veteran. I'm also a veteran in recovery. Part of my journey of getting to the kind of the work that I do today was my own journey in my active use of drugs and alcohol, and just basic journey that brought me to September 1993, where I decided to attempt to change my life. And through that journey of changing my life, I guess you can say, through the world that I found that was helping me start my journey of getting better. And that has been continuing since September of 1993. I learned a few things about myself that I was not really aware of back in the day. And that was, I realized that I was kind of always in an isolation mode. And I would use my drugs and alcohol as I worked through things as hopefully a method for me to maybe end my life. And what is really cool is I didn't. I am very grateful that I found my journey in recovery, which then kind of rolled me into doing kind of the work that I do. I'm a veteran peer support person. I support a lot of veterans, which rolled into advising and starting to do research within the academic community. Also becoming an advocate in the state of Wisconsin, and a co-founder of Dry Hooch of America, which at that time and was probably one of the first veteran peer support organizations within the state of Wisconsin. I'm really passionate about this work for many reasons, and one of the biggest ones that I have lost more than I would like to say brothers and sisters that have unfortunately died by suicide, or on the other side actually OD'd, and in a more permanent fashion. And I would like to say that my hope and my dream is I put myself out of a job, because that's really what my goal is. And through the work that Stefan has allowed me to participate in, and other work that I have done throughout the last 10, 15 years, I feel that we are making very small strides in that right direction, even though we got a long way to go. So I appreciate everybody that's on this and everybody's journey that has brought them to this. And the coolest thing about it is we're all here today talking about it. And with that, I appreciate you all.
Thank you so much, Mark. And with that kind of grounding, I'm going to describe a little bit of how the study itself works, why it's ongoing, what kinds of advice we need, because some of this is for you to guide us. As it turns out, there's this method to looking at individual deaths by suicide. We knew we needed to look at them, and we didn't learn these two words until a person very high up at the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention told these two words to us and said, "This is what you're trying to do." And the words were psychological autopsy. And it turned out that this method had existed and was used initially just to figure out if a death was a suicide. They were typically carried out as in the early 1960s, I think even one in the late 1950s, just to look at what happens in a given county or area. As you'll see, what we're doing is really different, but in a way it draws on that model that's continued from the early 1960s to today. And we're far from the only folks who do this kind of work, although the way we're doing it is totally unique. We've talked about opioid reduction, but the way our team thinks about suicide is that it's a complex event. It doesn't happen to every person who has opioids reduced. Indeed, some people feel much better. I mean, life is complicated and people are complicated. So this complex event of suicide can be considered as having influences or factors that are relevant to a given person at multiple levels. And it's sometimes called the socio-ecologic model, which is rather a mouthful, but it means that there's influences or factors that matter at the society level, like the healthcare policies of where you live, or stigma about getting mental health care. And at the community level, like whether you're rural or urban, whether you have your community has lots of resources or doesn't, whether you have a community of online folks who help you cope, organizational things. So when healthcare organizations make decisions, including when payers make decisions about what kinds of care and service they will cover, that's an organizational influence. Interpersonal factors are really emphasized by that person I mentioned before, Dr. Thomas Joyner, and I encourage you to look him up on YouTube or even to buy his book, Why People Die by Suicide. Social support, whether you've been exposed to others who considered or died by suicide, the types of social relationships you have, whether you feel yourself to have a sense of belonging with other people or thwarted in that effort to belong to a group, whether you feel like you're a burden to others or not. These are things that a person is thinking about. And then finally, there's individual factors, their pain treatment, their previous expressions of suicidal ideas, their mental health issues, their legal risks that they might be dealing with. All of these are potentially part of a story that we can assemble for an individual to try to understand where there are ways we can make a difference. I'm going to give some very practical questions that we can approach by collecting a detailed story through an interview where we can bring medical record review. How many of the people who are decedents had a rapid or a slow taper? Was there any potential hint of self-harm before or, well, after is kind of odd, but how many stated a concern to others? Risk factors, did they have some of those things that Dr. Joyner talked about, the sense of being a burden to others or a thwarted sense of belongingness, meaning you didn't feel like you belonged to anybody or to any group? What healthcare contacts occurred before suicide? Was there a missed opportunity to be helpful or healing? Did healthcare feature conflicts or impasses in care? I've observed those impasses and I've heard about them from people with long-term pain as well. What was their possession of medication that may have played a role in the suicide or a firearm? And for veterans, how many went outside the VA and maybe went to an emergency department? Was there something missed there? And we have medical records that we can seek with the right kind of participant for some people who elect to participate, but not all. And there's a separate team that looks at medical records. If someone is interviewed in our study, these are the kinds of questions we do, and it usually transpires, after a very detailed, informed consent. And I want to show you this before we talk about the challenge of recruitment. But we've been doing these now for about 6 months. We ask some closed-ended questions: race, gender, economic status, insurance status, whether they were religious or not, whether they trusted in the clergy, whether there was an ongoing legal dispute. There's some examples of interview topics on the right side: general health, mental health, pain history, healthcare experiences, social support, where they were, communications with others about their distress, sense of belongingness, military history. And a lot of times we use a kind of what I call a faux or a false close-ended question, meaning it sounds like a close-ended question, but it's really an opener. Do you think his or her suicide was related to a specific problem or event? That's a non-leading question. In theory, it's asking for a yes, no. But of course, if the person says yes, we say, well, what do you think the event was? Were there any changes in the care the person received for pain in the 6 months to a year before their death? Did any strike you as important? We're not driving people to just one conclusion here. We're asking for everything that could have played a role. The challenge that we face is recruitment, and it's trying to learn about an event where the reason for recruiting an informant, a person who's lost someone, is that a healthcare change occurred prior to the death. And this makes our study very different from that one from 1963 I showed you, or almost every other psychological suicide study that's ever existed. There is a reason why no one else in the world is trying to do this, but I didn't know that till I got halfway into this. The traditional study, somebody teams up with the medical examiner for the state of Utah or Florida or county, maybe it's New York City, and they just get all the deaths or all the suicides. And the medical examiner reaches out to the families with research consent. And the challenge is that medical examiners and coroners can't do a lot of it to help in this because they don't know about healthcare prior to the event. So that is not, we've required with medical examiners, but it's not straightforward for them. When we started to write proposals for this study, people said, you're in the VA. Why don't you just query all the medical records and reach out to the families? Well, there's some problems there. There are regulatory and legal issues that affect how you can reach out to individuals based on a death database, particularly when they've lost someone. There's also potential family perceptions. If the healthcare system that is seen as maybe having contributed in some way to the death is also reaching out to say, we want to talk, that could be great for some, but others may say, you're the last people I want to talk to, actually. So that left us with option 3, which is ethical and feasible, but hard, which is to go direct to the public and to go with partnered organizations and with public media and paid media. So now when we put our word out, people come to us if they want to, and we're not shoulder tapping. This has not been tried before in any prior psychological autopsy research. We had to figure it out from scratch. We're talking about speaking to the public to say, hey, has something happened that you want to talk about that is incredibly sensitive, often stigmatized, and where you might not trust people from healthcare institutions, which is, by the way, I work in a healthcare institution. So this requires money, it requires trust, it requires partners and creativity. And we're still learning how to do it. The model that we use now, I should say, is that paid media needs some sort of entry point where people can quickly click in and check out who we are. And we've paid with a contract to do that. And this is kind of our model. We speak to the public. That's what I'm doing here. We have some social media advertising as well. We're considering advertising in Military Times and other newspapers, but we don't have infinite money for that. In fact, we have a limited, very small contract. In most situations where somebody sees an ad, they can do a quick, smoothed out screener that asks their name, where they are, if the person who died is over 19, which is important for the institutional ethics. Do they think that there was a death by suicide that happened after a prescription opioid change? Not because of, but after. That's all we ask. And do they want to be contacted? If they don't want to be contacted, we should not contact them. And they're asked if they would like to proceed to do a much more detailed entry screener that we call the 46-item survey. It's housed on an extremely secure server at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, not in the VA, but the university has met oodles of criteria for Food and Drug Administration and others to house this kind of information. It's a survey. And the person is asked more information, including free text to explain, I don't know what happened. I think it might have been suicide. I'm not sure. I don't really understand what medicines are. They can say anything. And then we read their answers and we ask some of those people, based on their confidence and the information they share, to proceed with a more detailed informed consent than the one they click through, which is a rather lengthy document to have an interview. There is a reward or an incentive for their time, but it's very modest. It's $100 for an interview. Some people really want that, but it's not, when the interview is 2 hours long, that's real serious. What would someone see on Facebook? Well, they would see one of these 2 ads, but there's a version of this that's a little bit more military focused, that goes more often to groups for people who might be connected to the military would be, and the person who's bereaved happens to be wearing camouflage. If you look, there's also a non-military version. They both lead to a question and answer. But if you look at the ad that is paid on Facebook, you'll notice words that are not there include opioid, except in the name of the study, which seems to have been okayed by Facebook. And there's no mention of the word suicide. It's very sensitive for Facebook. But lost someone is pretty self-evident, I think. And people can answer some quick questions on Facebook, and they can then proceed further if they want. They can click on forward to a 46-item full screener, but very few do it. We've noticed this. We're trying to figure out how to help with that. Or they can just ask us to contact them, and we have a tracker, and we send them email, and we say, did you want us to talk to you, or do you want a link? If somebody just wants to kind of be screened but not deal with Facebook, there's a clean web page that they can go to, which I'll show a QR code for at the end, but it's go.uab.edu/CSI. But it's very simple. And again, the same 10 questions, which are right there. Did someone die after a change in pain medicine? Timing is what matters. And they can go forward to the 46-item detailed screener. I think I took the slide of that out because it was kind of onerous. Here's our progress to date. The red line shows how many have signed a consent to undergo full interview. The green line, which has squares, if you're colorblind, I'm sorry about this. I just realized red-green color blindness is the thing, but there's squares on it. That shows how many completed the interview, and that's 19 to date. And those lines are going up, which is good. And the thing I'll mention in a moment is that we've also learned that a lot of people, like hundreds of people, have interacted with the brief screener on Facebook, but not gone further forward, which means we probably need to increase the size of the advertising if we can find resources, and we need your help. I want to share some of the stories and insights that we've gained so far. These stories are anonymized carefully, and they do not mention the way that a person died, but they are meant to humanize sort of what's going on. So, and they are different from each other in the observations of the reporter who we interviewed. These are not subject yet to detailed analysis. I'm just giving you preliminary thumbnails. First one is the decedent in their 40s. The spouse spoke with us. And the spouse said the individual had chronic reflex pain syndrome, which used to be called reflex sympathetic dystrophy, and is a very painful condition for which our treatments are quite crummy. And they had been on opioids. They were being reduced in one state. They then moved to another state and had a much more rapid reduction. And the doctor said, I can't give you above this dose because my clinic will be shut down. And the interviewee does believe that we have more data, but what they thought is that it was the medication being reduced that was part of why they took their life. Another is a male in their 60s. It's the brother who spoke to us. The individual had chronic pain from back injury and cancer, and that had left them with some prior overdose attempts, and doctors didn't want to prescribe opioids anymore. You can understand where they're coming from. The interviewee believed that the decedent was caught in the opioid crisis, that's her quote, and treated like an addict instead of a paying patient. So that's one theme we're beginning to see, that people have views on, is this addiction, is it not? The next one, very different story. Someone in their 40s, a cousin, spoke with us with a lot of insight. Chronic pain from a car accident. There was, in fact, a prior suicide attempt 20 years before. And this is the quote. He was pretty straight open with saying, yeah, I'm addicted, but it was because he needed it. But now here's the critical word from the informant. He says, no one else believed him other than his mother. It's not that he didn't have pain, but no one needed to be that wasted all the time. And there was suicide at a family holiday gathering. And finally, a female in her 60s who was a veteran. So that's of particular interest to our funder. Cousin spoke to us, and is a cousin who housed that veteran during the last 4 years. Chronic pain from a car accident and a work injury, and there was pain compounded with mental health problems. And there was also a history of sexual assault in the Army, which is highly prevalent among our women veterans. And PTSD and pain combined and kept her up at night. And she had received Veterans Administration care for mental health issues after coming home from her service overseas, but then she dropped out of VA care. That didn't help, said the informant. And the participant expressed frustration with the lack of follow-up from the VA after the decedent herself stopped going to therapy. Sometimes people lose the capacity to ask for help, she says. They have no hope. And yes, there was an opioid reduction in the intermediate, but I emphasize the VA relationship issue there. Some of the themes that we've seen to date: multiple pain doctors. Many people had lots of procedures, many types of prescriptions. There often were previous suicide attempts or mention of suicide in a conversation prior to death. Many people had active lifestyles prior to those opioid reductions. There's a meaningful frequency of history of childhood trauma, not always, meaningful frequency of family history of mental illness, ER visits, geographic moves and fragmented care, financial stress. Addiction versus dependence is a theme that keeps coming up from the families. Close relationships with family are very often present. Some of the family members agreed that they could not see any other option besides suicide. That's rather provocative. And the perception of burdensomeness to others. These are just preliminary. We are still in the process of reading now already hundreds of pages of transcript from just the first, umpteen surveys, interviews. What's the result that we aim to? And then I'll aim to asking you for advice. There are 5 to 8 million people on long-term opioids in the US. Suicide is not going down in the United States among anybody. The CDC and the Food and Drug Administration have said, be cautious in tapering, that the rate of taper matters. But the evidence statistically doesn't suggest the rate of taper is the sole factor governing whether someone actually takes their life. Suicides and overdose after taper are just not understood. And we can't deduce how to make anyone's care safer from statistics. We can't assure, and I can't assure, and I want policymakers to act on this risk. Personally, this matters to me. But I can't assure policymakers will act on this risk without actual insight from individual stories. Remember that TWA 800. The way the plane went down led to a rule change that caused people to think differently. If suicides are always happening with healthcare ongoing, we have to improve the care that's actually happening for people. If the suicide is happening because care is interrupted or care is interrupted in specific ways, then we can work to focus on ameliorating that disruption in care. And in the future, if we can continue this kind of work, which no one else is doing, we would like to look at the overdose deaths that happen after prescription reductions. I'd also like to look at the deaths from suicide with pain and no opioid change. Those are also something of importance. The recruitment challenge is this. I mentioned this. 202 people filled out that 10-item questionnaire on Facebook, 38 on our landing page. But people drop off. They don't want to take the next step of a consent for a detailed interview. Relatively few proceed to that 46-item questionnaire. My guess is that's a hang-up. A lot of people just don't want to do more, and that's totally fine. But some, if we expand the reach and more people engage in the first part, more people engage in the second part. Or we can clean up some of the technical connections. We noticed that our Facebook doesn't redirect in the cleanest way with the clearest information. We're fixing that. So really, you can help us think a little bit about, do you wish to share word of this study? Do you know outlets where we should be trying to advertise? Assume for a moment that we do not have an infinite budget. In fact, that's one of my issues. And we're looking for funders to expand the media purchase, not our team, but just the media purchase. In the event that you wish to share, there's general study information. If someone just wants to know, who are these people? Why are they doing this? What's their record? That's on the first website called csiopioids.org. It's also the most memorable. If someone was really sure they kind of wanted a detailed screener right away, that's go.uab, which is our university, go Blazers, go.uab.edu/CSI And if somebody just wanted to share a PDF, I've put up a link to a one-page PDF that they can send to someone they care about, or someone who might be curious. That kind of explains who and what we are and how to get involved. I want to highlight that there's always a question that comes up, and I will put the link to this as well in the chat when we're done talking, if someone hasn't already. I sent these to some folks with United Suicide Survivors International earlier, but there are people who are alive who would like to stay that way. And they are facing trauma right now. And it's to some degree their dilemma that first led me to participate as an advocate and also led me to want to lead this research. But I did my best to draft my best guidance for a difficult situation and put it on medium.com. It's not an official study product, or study is not engaged in healthcare, but I believe people do contact us, and we had to have something we could say. This is mostly focused on how to engage with the doctor, all the way down to what to do if you can't talk to that doctor and you have to go elsewhere. It's not perfect because the situation is very, very, very far from perfect. But it is about 14 pages of thoughts.
Wow, we have a lot of engagement in the chat. Actually, really hard to keep up with. So much is going on there. I wanted to let you know that we have attendees from all over the US, Maine, Florida, Wisconsin, several people from Wisconsin, Hawaii, Colorado, Puerto Rico, New York, and someone just came in from Nepal. So we've got a question from Alan. He says, this might be a premature question, but are you studying prescriber suicide as it relates to opiates and the feds? Hopelessness with prescribers as well.
No, not at this time. We have had prescribers contact us who wish to be in the study, though, about their patients. We had to seek separate ethical approval to interview a prescriber, and we just did one. And I think that's a really important question, actually. And I hope that you would, if you want to write us a suggestion.
We have a medical professional on our board. Chris, did you have a question?
Dr. Stefan, what do you think about Suboxone and other opioid dependent type agents in the assistance of pain?
Now we're talking about sort of my clinical opinion based on the data rather than what the research is uncovering, and that's fine. I do give lectures on this all the time. So right now there's a real controversy within the field Some agencies, including the one that employs me, are beginning to say, we don't approve of opioids for chronic pain. And I personally am speaking for myself. I think that sometimes they're absolutely necessary. But then they say, oh, but if you're going to prescribe buprenorphine, which is the ingredient that is offered in both the formulation used for drug addiction, which would be Suboxone or there's a few others, and also the active ingredient in two pain-approved products, Butrans patches and Belbuca, which is a cheek swab. My view is that with high-risk patients where we've already had trouble with standard opioids, I sometimes will say, do you want to switch to this? And if there's been real trouble and I'm worried about, I've seen overdosing type events, I'll say, I think we have to switch to this, because if I write a prescription for morphine and you are not alive because you can't manage this, I'd rather not. And we need you, I don't want to disrupt opioids for someone where I feel that stopping would be dangerous. And that's often, I believe, that stopping destabilizes. Where the controversy arises is this. Some people would say that buprenorphine is always better. We should always use that in favor of other opioids if the purpose is long-term. Or some people would say every single human being currently on fentanyl patches or morphine or hydrocodone long-term should be switched to buprenorphine. First of all, I have not seen evidence that that is safe to switch somebody without their agreement and consent. So I think that the reason to do a change of care without a person's agreement has to be rock solid and based on extraordinary concern for risk. That's my personal view. I have colleagues who see it differently. I also noticed that in some recent trials, preliminary presentations offering buprenorphine as part of taper did not alter the trajectories of the patient's well-being, safety, or taper rate. So I think it's still safer. It's almost impossible to overdose on buprenorphine. It is an opioid. I just don't like rocking the boat in ways that could destabilize a human being, particularly if it feels violative to them.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Dana. Do you have a question for our panel?
I don't have a question personally, but there's a lot of questions in the chat. Melissa is curious on your view of cutting someone off pain medication cold turkey and referring somebody to a quote unquote pain psychologist instead.
I think the statistical information that we have at this time does not suggest that that is safe. That is, there could exist a human being who would benefit from a taper. I don't think anybody believes that cutting off immediately is safe. There is both distress, but with opioids, some possibility of cardiac events that has been described as, so cutting off instantly is high risk. Obviously, it happens way too much. It's been documented that 71% of discontinuations are sudden discontinuations. Don't approve, not safe. And I think that even forcible tapering, my view is that the evidence for doing a forced thing like that has not been, there's just no evidence for it. And I generally have taken the view, and I've published this and I'll put a link in the chat, I've taken the view that if you don't have evidence that something is safe and effective, doing it in a forced way runs against conventional medical ethics, which are to seek consent.
Peter had a question asking if the study is only open to relatives.
No, we are open as well to close friends. What happens, you might think, wait a second, no one is a perfect informant. It's really important to know that. That doesn't exist. So if a close friend wants to be the reporter and when we interview them, we do that. There's a note taker and an interviewer. And in the process, at the end of that, we say, what's our gut instinct as to how informative and aware this person was? And we have 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s, 1s. So a friend could be involved. And if we learn totally different things from people who don't know as much to people who know more, that'll be informative to us. This is a very qualitative approach. We're not trying to generate a statistical model. Sometimes close friends know more than family does. Sometimes they don't.
We have a number of people in the chat that are kind of in a desperate situation right now on this topic. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the resources available to them as they're being forced tapered.
My doctor has to change my prescription. Is, by the way, I wrote it when that was what was going on. Now what's happening is pharmacy chain distributors are also forcing pharmacies not to issue prescriptions as a result of some opioid litigation. So I didn't write my commentary to address that, I think that if the clinician, the doctor's making decisions, some of the guidance in the chat is about seeking a conversation. We're in a weird situation where the doctors seem to need care as much as the patients. Like they're super nervous, they're really agitated and reactive. They're not listening very clearly to the human being, and that's a real concern to me. And sometimes I offer language to try to help get the doctor into conversation. I suggest ways to pursue a conversation. That's assuming you can have one. Now, what if the doctor says our practice has stopping all opioids? We just don't do that anymore. Then there's about 3 things that come to mind, maybe 4, but none are perfect. One is, of course, ask. Maybe ask in writing. Are you planning and do you have someone to refer me to? Having a written letter where you requested that and having evidence that you did not get a response is actually a potential basis for a complaint to a medical board. That doesn't solve the acute problem, but boards need to see that this is happening, and eventually they may begin to act on it. In some states, they are, because I'm stopping and I am not referring begins to look a lot like abandonment. The other thing that comes to mind is contacting the insurer, and the insurer is not required to find someone who prescribes opioids, but they're required to somehow engage in helping you find a way to sort your care out. So they have to be aware. The next thing is the state insurance commissioner or the state medical board. They can't act instantly either. That's the problem with this. But they are often saying, we've never heard of any problem. We think things are going swimmingly. We reduced opioids by 50%. Finally, in the extreme situations, I have met patients who look for a buprenorphine or Suboxone prescriber, just as Chris said. There's a lot of them out there that either, now doctors could all prescribe, but many don't, but there's a finder on the SAMHSA website. And then some people have gone straight into methadone clinics, which are very onerous, but they are increasingly used to the idea that people without addiction will walk in their doors and say, I have no place to go. And not all of them, but many of them are now saying, fine, whatever, we don't want you to fall apart. And I've seen them intervene. This is not good. And there are insurance companies that are very fond of reductions that are happening and think of it as a safety thing, that they're creating safety. And life's more complicated than that.
Stacy, do you have a question or something you want to relay from the chat?
Is there funding available for your study? Someone had asked that.
Well, first of all, our funding right now, first we got a little bit of pilot money from the Department of Medicine at University of Alabama, Birmingham. And there are 2 operational units in the university that are doing some of the work. Then we got a grant from the Veterans Administration. But just to launch this with contracts, to get the ethics, the certificates of confidentiality, ate up time, and we're still expanding. So we've learned we are able to receive donations, not to the federal government, of course not, but to the university part. My university division can receive donations, but I'm not, that's not here to ask for money. But yeah, sure, if somebody's saying this really matters to me, that is possible. You have to email us, and I have to put you in touch with the division finance officer.
I'm going to open it up to the panel for final thoughts. So Jim and Mark and Stefan.
I saw a few questions kind of talking about the VA and how the VA kind of works and the interesting journeys that every VA is. I guess my biggest advice to folks about the VA system is that every hospital's an entity upon itself, and every hospital administrator is kind of the king of that kingdom, for lack of a better way of saying it. So they implement what they feel they need to implement based on the rules that comes down from Congress. Congress makes the rules. National VA kind of starts deciphering it, goes down to their vision, which then they send it down to their VA hospitals that are within their vision, and then they implement. So not every VA is the same. Not every VA has the same kind of thing that another VA may have. So for those that are having problems or issues, or however you want to kind of describe that, they have patient advocates, and don't hesitate to ask and advocate for yourself. That is the most important part of that, because if you're not advocating, asking, because we as patients have the right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So never forget that. And if you're not quite getting the right answers to those questions, go find another doc, because we have a right to do that also. There are as many different doctors within the system that for us that are actually using the VA, there are many docs that we can go to get a different doc. So they cannot say no. I mean, I guess for me, that's the main thing. Do not be afraid to advocate. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And don't be afraid to ask for a different provider. And if you got those things, they have peer support specialists or they have patient advocates that will help you, that the VA pays to do that kind of stuff. I guess that's all I have to say about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for providing peer support for our panelists tonight. Jim, what are your final thoughts?
Sally, thank you for this opportunity very much. I appreciate the chance to sort of tell my brother's story, and in hopes of enhancing participation in the study that's taking place at UAB. I'm a very politically minded person. What I want to come out of this whole thing is a study that identifies, I have very strong feelings about the role of the DEA in the healthcare industry today, and I think it's inappropriate. And what I really want to see happen, I would hope to happen, would be that we could use this study that has all the appropriate academic accolades to convince elected officials in Washington that somebody's got to do something to help people that are truly in pain and in need. But again, I know suicide has a lot of different facets. This is only one of them. But if all of you could please share this study with people you know, we would really appreciate greater participation as much as possible.
Thank you. And Stefan, close us out.
I start from the understanding that people live complex lives. They are not just numbers. When health systems or bureaucracies create numeric targets, they can be very valuable. We know how to get the number of mammograms up because we measure how many we do. But not all numeric targets help us take care of all human beings. And I feel a profound sensitivity to the people whose lives are complex and where the targets don't serve them well. And I have been personally committed to trying to prevent tragedy through speaking out, but also through just collecting rigorous data as honestly as I can and acknowledging that my advocacy has to sit separate from how data is collected. I also have complete and total respect for people using their voices. And something Mark said is really important. It applies outside the VA, but within the VA, when a veteran tells me I'm going to Congress, I say, you know what, that might be the best thing because it might help make care better for the next veteran. I mean, I don't assume that complaining is bad. I assume complaining is how you get systems to change. Sometimes I've been the complainer, and yeah, some people don't like it. But luckily at my own place where I work at the university and in the VA, my leaders have stuck up for me every time pressure came down. They said, nope, this guy's doing good work. We're not getting in his way. So I'm very, very lucky, and I'm not going to stop as long as I'm just lucky.
Yes,
So
that's a great way also. That goes back to our mission, which is helping people to turn their pain into purpose. Advocating is one way that we can do that.
Thank you guys for such a great webinar, so much information and such a very important topic. United Survivors, we have a new lived experience collective, and we want as many people to join as possible. I'm part of this. I think it's a great thing. We have different benefits for folks, and you can join it for as little as $5 a month.
As you can see, for as little as $5 a month, you get a free newsletter subscription, featured mention in our newsletter and on the website, a US LinkedIn membership group, as well as Lived Experience Collective membership listing. And the features go up as you go up in price. But really, it's building that community and keeping in contact with everything that United Suicide Survivors has to offer.
And don't forget to follow us on social media as well. We are on all of the things, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, unitesurvivors.org for more information.
That's a wrap. Thank you, everybody. We'll catch you on the next webinar coming up in the next few weeks. Until then, take care.